All right, so I've been consulting for most of my life. And a few years ago, I was having a conversation with an executive of a Fortune 500 company. And this conversation changed my professional path. It gave me insight into the challenges that organizations face, not just with technology, but also all of the aspects of business. The conversation started with, I have a problem. Our lead data engineer just put in his 2 weeks. Now, we started this project about 6 months earlier. It was a massive data integration with a key business system. And it was an important business initiative. A lot of eyes on this project. There was a lot of excitement and energy. And a few weeks after the project kicked off, I got a similar call. Their lead data architect just put in his 2 weeks. Now, this lead data architect had built most of the data processes and systems up until this point. The team at large didn't know how all those different systems worked. They didn't know how to maintain it, and they didn't know how to build on top of it. It was a really custom process, really technical, and it worked well, but was not scalable. Going back to this conversation, it was a different tone from this executive. There was the sound of exhaustion and defeat. Not only are they losing another person, the team's getting harder to maintain, other urgent matters, ad hoc requests, start piling on for the team to handle and prioritize. They're pulled in a lot of different directions. The business isn't seeing results yet. And now they're getting questions about potentially trying a new data platform that's promising to make things a lot easier. She's stressed. How do we get to this point? Ultimately, the reason that this conversation changed my perspective and path for what I would want to do with my life, this conversation was not unique. I've seen it time and time again at lots of different organizations. We hear about new technology, we create a POC and see a lot of potential, get projects lined up, but with new tech, there's a lot of unknown unknowns. This is where all of the issues start to pile on. The larger organization starts to get more involved as this project kicks off. You have security teams, governance teams, BAs, everyone getting involved, and everyone wants to know and have a part of this. This is where things start to slow down, and the POC gets very difficult to get to production, considering all these different aspects. What we thought and had a lot of energy early on, our energy starts to get drained more and more. This is ultimately the chasm of taking something from a POC and getting it into production. There's concerns about compliance and every different aspect. So AI will make this better, right? So with AI, things in theory are a lot easier. We don't need to get as low level potentially. That's what's promised. We can throw our data in an LM, throw some RAG on it, and begin, getting results. But ultimately, or should we use a large language model, or fine-tune a model, or maybe a diffusion model? There's multiple different kinds of RAG. Which one should we choose? Ultimately, there's a million terms, and they get changed and added every day. This is happening faster with AI than it has with any other technology that we've seen. And a lot of the distraction ends up coming from trying to chase whatever the new latest thing is and find a problem for that technology to solve. It creates a lot of chaos. In addition to that, now your teams are also asking new questions. A lot more uncertainty with how AI works, how it's approached, and how we maintain these solutions. And it hasn't worked out super well in the enterprise right now. For smaller organizations, AI is easier to implement. There's less red tape to go through. But for enterprises, there's a lot more consideration, a lot more at stake for the organization. So really, our chasm has just got bigger. This is one of the reasons that I decided to start Scaled Sense. In talking with this executive, I noticed that it's not always the technology. Oftentimes, it's not the technology that's the problem. And the teams spend time, lots of time, iterating on deploying solutions or building, writing code that's very repetitive, and using tools that are very technology focused. And so what I felt was needed is a business perspective on top of all your processes that then follow on with the technology that suits those needs. After all, it's pretty straightforward what we're trying to do, right? We get a question from someone, we need to get data to answer that question, interpret that data, and utilize it, return that data back. What this looked like oftentimes, email from a CFO asking for your P&L. We get that, run some queries, and return that back to them. With AI, we're doing a very similar sort of thing. We might use a chatbot or other experiences, but the flow is ultimately the same. We need to be able to answer questions, get the right data together, and provide a result to the user. So what's ultimately needed? It's a business-focused look over all of the processes. So even if the use case itself fails, especially with AI where things are not guaranteed, and it's hard to know whether they will work or not until you're actually using production data and at scale, we want to be able to still move forward and build upon what we've built and learned, even if that particular use case fails. And oftentimes with POCs, as we try to build them out, and we go from excitement and a lot of energy, and that starts dwindling over time, we start sacrificing things like automation, like compliance, like scalability, and maintainability. So what can we do about that? Basically, we need a platform, we need a framework that compounds and increases speed and value over time. So ultimately, I have a roadmap that basically starts with focusing on the business and the problem, and then layering in the technology in a way that allows you to consistently build over time in an iterative fashion and not need to boil the ocean on the first pass. So we start with defining guiding principles. These are important because these are what answer a lot of the questions we have along the way. These can be general, these can also be very specific. But there's a few very important aspects to this. There's a lot of tools and technologies that exist that can help you do and automate a lot of these processes. So when we're talking about autonomy, we're talking about what are we building our core business systems within? Is this a platform that is going to be here in 5 years? Is this a platform that has the feature set we need? What happens if that company doesn't want to support what they've built and they're going to pivot to something else? So I believe it's a core principle to build these foundational layers within scalable and open platforms and technologies, and then extend those as needed so that your company can drive priority and the roadmap of your own organization. We need the ability to move fast and have confidence when we do it so that we don't lose confidence of the business as we are deploying technology. The second is identifying the problem. So we need to take a very important look at the types of problems that we want to solve. It's very easy to spin up POCs that don't consider the long-term ramifications or how this actually will provide value to the organization. And so oftentimes, we start with a POC and see a lot of value in it, just accounting for the time it took to build that particular POC. But now, when we go through the longer process of actually putting this into production, we start to, that value trade-off starts to come into play, where things might take longer than we expected, maybe twice as long, and is that value still there in the solution? So we need to look for problems and identify those particular problems for what we want to tackle with new technologies. In addition to that, we also want to build solutions that our organization is uniquely positioned to solve. If we're trying to rebuild something that is generally available, that is not as valuable. And so really, how can we leverage the data that we have to identify key problems that we should focus on? In addition to that, with AI in particular, we need to think about, are we replacing an existing process or performing and deploying a new capability? In terms of replacement, AI changes from a deterministic to a probabilistic model. So ultimately, what that means is your organization is built around how things work today without AI for this particular capability. And as soon as you start replacing with AI, you now have to consider long tail errors, basically, from the results. What you already have a team built around for very set use cases, we know these types of jobs fail in these certain ways. You will generally have less errors because you can answer the questions better. However, either errors are not easily classifiable into certain categories. So it takes a different sort of organizational structure to be able to handle those. So oftentimes new capabilities tend to be easier. All right, then it comes down to building the engine. And so what ultimately is important is, one, determining, are you going to build this internally, or are you going to use a product? Again, this is why we built Scaled Sense, but many organizations that we've worked with build these teams, these platforms, these tools internally. And that works, but again, we want to make sure that these products, if we choose to buy off the shelf or build internally, we're following these guiding principles that we talked about to ensure that we can drive our own business roadmap. So we start the engine with a intelligent data core. So basically, this is your data foundation. What this allows you to do is, instead of integrating directly with data sources themselves, focus on, again, business process and defining that architecture and how it's laid out for your entire business, but starting in an iterative and flexible manner so that you can bring in the data you need for this given use case and then build upon that as you add more and more use cases. This allows you to tackle more and more complex use cases that require more data every time you add a new capability. As an example of that, we might look at, and there's a few basically examples of how this might look within an organization. We're using healthcare pricing and a patient portal as an example. And so basically what we have is we've identified source systems being hospital and insurance company websites where they're publicly required to disclose pricing information. And so we need to capture information from those systems. Now, what you could do is you could pull that data in and push it right to your application and begin utilizing that data right away. And that works and tends to be a little bit quicker initially, but then you have all of these point-to-point integrations over time. And so what we want to do is think about, how does this information fit into our business, and how do we define our business in the data model. We might also pull in an EHR or other internal systems. And so again, we need to build integrations. We often use Azure Data Factory or Airflow for doing those types of things. But a common pattern, and this goes back to the standards of how we integrate with various different types of sources, so that again, this is repeatable and we're not redefining things over and over. But more importantly, is defining in our business, how do we talk about these entities, the data that we're getting? We need to define structures that represent how our business operates. We use Data Vault for this type of data model. And what you want to focus on is modeling your business in the data model as opposed to modeling your source systems within your data model. This allows flexibility for changing out source systems as well, or adding new source systems without you having to reconfigure your entire data model. And again, there's lots of different patterns that allow you to do agile data modeling, but again, you want to focus and build that into a standard so that after we've now pulled in this healthcare pricing data for our first use case, we can easily utilize this and join it to the rest of our organization's data, enabling additional use cases to be tackled without having to start over from scratch. Then linking all that data together, tying together all of these entities that again represent our business processes. And this model grows over time. The idea is to start with the data needed for this initial use case. This lets you move in an agile manner, and then build on top of it as you add more and more sources. So from our healthcare pricing example, we're now going to take our attribute data that we've gotten from these websites. We're also going to annotate this data in a way so that you either have a data catalog or somewhere where basically your organization doesn't have to answer the same question again every time you want to use this data. You want to define how it's used, how it's intended to be used, and different attributes about it. Has this gone through a governance review? Is this the source of truth for this type of information? So that as you start utilizing this and curating that data to be utilized by the use cases, it's much faster and you're really not repeating that work over and over again. What that ends up looking like is typical data pipelines, pulling from these data sources, modeling it into that enterprise model, and then providing data products that are curated for end consumers to use. This is ultimately the foundation of what is needed for AI. Again, you can start with the point-to-point pulling data, but when you begin to mature into a model closer to this, which most people do over time, you now have to rebuild those integrations and rebuild those solutions. In addition to that, you start to learn more and more about how your business operates and where the pitfalls of our source systems. It helps us to identify additional data sources that will be necessary to answer the questions correctly and bring all that data together. Then we get into the fun part. So this is deciding and defining what type of technology you want to use to solve this problem. There's lots of different options with AI. Most commonly, everyone's pretty familiar with a chatbot or an assistant. There are background agents, and then there's BI dashboards. What's important is to go back to the determination that we ultimately need to define how this provides unique value to our business outside of someone going to ChatGPT and asking the same question. So there's nuance in trying to define what we can do and how we can implement solutions so that, again, it enhances our existing products and solutions within the organization and is more ease of use to the end users. So the AI is not the product, it is a feature of your platform that enables users to do things faster. So we need to identify those use cases that exist today with data available and how we incorporate those into our current products. And so the example of this patient portal for a patient at a hospital, we might add a chatbot. an assistant. And so what we're doing here is now, again, out of the box, you can tie in an assistant to this type of platform pretty easily. But what would be better is if we don't have to provide details about what is on the page I'm looking at. I can just ask a question and it knows exactly what I'm focused on right now. So this is providing contextual data to your processes and building those solutions out. So you might ask, for a given diagnosis, what is needed and what's recommended. You might also look to figure out how much this costs. This is where you start to compound the value of all of the enterprise data components and that foundational layer. So what the assistant needs at this point in time is more information than what's provided in the context. And so now that we have an enterprise data model that is already pre-joined to all of our different data sources, and we've now pulled in publicly provided pricing data for insurance providers and hospital systems, we can now ask the user, we'd also like to look up in that enterprise data model what your current insurance provider is in your plan. The user can allow that, and then utilize these different technologies to basically pull in the data that's necessary from our enterprise data model. And what this is doing is this is layering through many different strategies within AI. We're starting with an LLM integration for just the conversational aspects. We've tied in an enterprise data model API that contains all of our data, all of our business rules, all pre-built in, so we're not trying to figure that out on the fly. And a RAG implementation so that when a user asks about certain services and pricings for a given policy, we can provide those prices. We can additionally call other services that we may or may not be AI driven. So additional tool calling through MCP servers and various other APIs to basically utilize and compound, again, our value that we can provide to the users. And you don't have to start from scratch with all of these aspects. You can start with the base use case and then layer on top. And it becomes much easier now to build on top of this platform with that foundational model and that engine that drives the data that's necessary for the use case. You may have another team that's building another use case and integrating with data, and all of a sudden that data becomes available in this API, the same API that is available to this application. And so we now start to compound our value throughout the organization. What we saw was utilizing contextual information from our applications and pulling those in. Curating enterprise data and making that data available to our applications, and utilizing other services and pulling other data from the organization. An example of an agentic approach in the same example application might be for lab work, where typically an existing hospital might have labs that are uploaded by the provider itself, and you might want to be able to add or allow a user to upload their own lab work they've gotten from other providers. And so you could either just allow and import that file and make it available, or you can utilize AI to begin to extract information based on the contextual information of that document, and then enrich your website and your data sources with that new data. And then provide feedback mechanisms so that the user can correct data if it's incorrectly provided. And this also compounds and teaches your platform how to improve the process to make it better more and more over time. On top of being able to upload those custom results, you can now show it side by side and in all of your analytical dashboards with all of the users' existing information. And these agentic approaches, with what is happening in this upload example here, we are using background processes to process these documents, general LLMs to extract information, provided context of the types of documents and fields that we look to extract, and then surface those to the user. The agentic approaches are more goal-oriented and asynchronous, and ultimately, again, can run more in their own process. You can also layer these agentic approaches on top of each other and have OCR agents. You can have particular types of extraction agents, all sorts of tools that you can now begin to chain together to take more of the human out of the loop of the actual flow and provide value faster. In addition to that, typical BI dashboards that we're all familiar with, again, you can utilize all this new information to now provide better, faster insights to those end users. The last piece of this engine that I'm talking about is a key factor. And this is how this engine allows you to move faster, stay compliant, and keep all of the teams happy for all the questions that they might have. And again, this tends to be the step that most people skip, wait till the end, or doesn't get built at all. What we need in this layer is the ability to provide the confidence so that we can move fast. If there are issues identified, to surface them, roll back changes. This allows our organizations and our business to give us the rope to move faster, try new things, and roll out to certain sets of individuals for new features. It allows you to be consistent across your environments. This is important, especially in higher compliance industries, and to be extensible so that you can utilize the newest and best technologies over time. You don't want to be locked into one type of way. This, again, gives you that confidence to move things between environments, ensure people have the right permissions between those environments. And so ultimately, the roadmap, when talking about anything related to AI or data in general, or ultimately solving business problems, is to make sure that we're focusing on the right things initially, and then identifying the right problems and choosing the right tools for the right job at that right time. What that allows you to do is take that initial use case, add one more use case to it, and now you start to build on top of it, create that exponential increase in value provided to the organization. This also allows you to move faster to deliver new use cases since your data is already in a cleaned and modeled way. But the important part here is, and this often gets pushed to the side, is to focus on choosing the right use cases to start with, not boiling the ocean, which leads to months and months of delays and complexity. Start with something simpler, focus on delivering the value for that piece, and then move to the next and iterate from there. This allows the organization to scale in parallel, as well as then, again, grow and compound the value that you can provide the organization. This also allows, as folks are moving from one solution to another, or one new technology that gets released, and you need to rebuild your entire processes and your existing point-to-point solutions, it allows you to plug in and create extensible capabilities based on whatever is the newest and latest thing today. All right. And so ultimately, wanted to kind of close by touching on there's a lot of different aspects to incorporating technology in business, and what we want to do is focus on choosing the right tools and technologies that allow us to scale with our business, but also that allows us to move quickly and really take into account the business process and incorporate that into our technology more than layering technology on top of our business. That's it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do some Q&A for Brian, so are you ready?
Yep.
So whoever's got a question, please raise your hand. Susan and I will walk a microphone to you, and we've got another one back there. So just make sure you have a mic before you start talking for the recordings, please.
Thanks. Hi, Brian. Sam DeSalvatore with Blueprint. You didn't. I saw compliant by defaults. We didn't really talk a good deal about security. A lot of our clients really are concerned about how the RAG and the LLM, your enterprise data model, can stay segregated from all that public data that you're pulling into that enterprise data model. Would you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so there's two different aspects to it. You have the infrastructure capabilities, and that goes to the automation aspect. So you have your general baselines of how you store your data, the rules to your business that you can codify in those automation platforms, so that ultimately you are able to, when a new development team wants to deploy a new service, these are already defined by your security teams, by your compliance teams, to ensure that they are valid and compliant. And so we start there with the infrastructure layer. And again, that's something that needs to be built in and codified so that it doesn't become a governance process that slows down the overall actual process of reviewing every new solution and its architecture independently. If we start with those standards and those processes and the automation around it, we can ensure that the development teams can move at their own speed and we don't bottleneck it with the organization. From a data perspective, with that enterprise data model, what you can ultimately do is as you bring in new data, where I was talking about those annotations and classifying the data as it's coming in, that is, in the example I presented, useful to using the data and understanding how it's meant to be used. What additionally you can do with that is begin to identify what fields contain PII, what data contains information that we ultimately want to then build a security model around for the actual access layer. So that when users are pulling data and it gets modeled into that enterprise model, you can build in row level, column level security so that any application that is using that API automatically is pre-filled with all of the authentication that's necessary to access the data and make sure it's in the right place and accessed by the right users. You can use these same sort of access mechanisms for these agents. So potentially you might have an agent that you want to use Claude or Gemini, and potentially one of these providers is approved by the organization for internal data use, one is not. The same entitlements that given to users can get given to the agents, so that if that agent either gets push data or tries to access data that it doesn't have access to or shouldn't have access to, it will be rejected and we can log and audit. And really that's actually the foundational part of the enterprise data model, is instead of having to redefine these security policies for every integration over and over again and make sure they all stay in sync, now that you have that enterprise model, we have that all incorporated so that it gets provisioned to all of the different services and use cases over time. And as those security rules change, you can change those policies in one place, and again, it gets applied everywhere. And so you have a single auditable point where you can look at how all of your data is being used.
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm a student of the university. I have been working in healthcare environments for a long time. So I have a question. How fast does the system can align with the changes of the market for the plans? I like the example that you were putting there. So healthcare is really wild in the changes.
Yeah.
How fast is the plan going to adapt in terms of how, because I saw that it was easily to call for information for the plan with the codes and the diagnosis, and then have a quote, which is something really important for the patients. But how fast it's going to align to the changes of the market adapted to the healthcare?
Yeah, so I mean, healthcare is definitely one of the more complex environments that you want to incorporate in these solutions. And again, a lot of it comes down to the automation that gets put into place. If you're building the point-to-point solutions and you're not thinking through, again, the consistency across the organization, you now have to, as things change in the market, we need to now go to all of our different solutions and assess, are we compliant, are we not compliant, should we be showing these things, can we provide this data, and whatnot. If you have that consistent layer that's uniform, you can now apply those and utilize automation to push out any of those changes from an infrastructure or that data policy perspective at the same time. So again, it goes back to the automation, because that's ultimately what trips up so many organizations with AI is, or any data solution really. You deploy this point solution, and now everyone becomes a maintenance burden that you're thinking about day in and day out. If you unify that automation to deploy, monitor, maintain, you now it doesn't scale as linearly with increasing the different solutions you're deploying, because you're reusing and utilizing existing components.
Is it on? I may be doing it. Is it on? Can you guys hear me? I can just yell.
No, you should be good.
Sorry, thank you. Hi. Oh, that's better. Okay. My name's Hannah Ballawender. I'm a student in the master's program at the University of Akron. So based on your experience as owner of this company or as overseeing this company, what's the hardest, most challenging job you've had to do to implement into a company, if you can divulge information?
It goes back to process, ultimately, and identifying the right systems, how they need to be accessed, and ultimately the functional requirements for any given use case. Particularly with POCs, people start by not as much caring about those particular details. And then this is one of the parts that layers in as you start to try to move this to production is, again, now people start caring about what you're actually using. Should we have even been using that data for this type of solution? Can we show that to a user? All those different aspects. And oftentimes those things are not known. And so that part just takes time. And so the more, again, you can move in an agile manner, it allows you to just move faster in implementing those changes when they come in. But a lot of it is just defining what do we actually want to implement.
All right, who else do we have? We got about 10 minutes left, so plenty of time for questions.
Hi, I'm Dr. Farasta from University of Akron. What are the expectations of business enterprises from graduates about the knowledge vis-a-vis AI? What do they expect the students to bring into the workplace?
Flexibility. Being able to learn things quickly is one of the most important aspects. It's never going to be one particular technology or technique or something along those lines. It's how fast can you take a new technique, figure out how that gets incorporated into the platform, the automation, into a solution without knowing anything about it. And so, because again, AI, there's new types of models, new structures every day. And so it's being able to look at, assess all the different things that are coming out, understand how that could be valuable, keeping that in the toolkit, but then also when we identify something as potentially valuable to our organization, how we then apply that to our business to actually get the value from it. Understanding those details, understanding particular industries or how the business operates is one of the biggest things that we've seen lacking in organizations and technical folks is they like the tech a lot. And again, those are great, but you need to be able to just move fast with the tech. That's sort of the expectation. And then on top of that, understand and want to understand the business aspects that you're trying to solve, because ultimately if you don't provide the business value, it's not going to be a success.
Can you? All right. My name is Jen. I work with Westfield. I'm just curious, do you always recommend Data Vault for modeling, or do you have any pros or cons you want to share?
If you're going to use Data Vault, you need automation. So it's very complex. The way that I try to describe it is it's very complete in that it can model and answer a lot of the questions and basically any different kind of data that comes in. And oftentimes, someone might start with other modeling techniques like Inmin or Kimball, and again, that starts to become more of those point-to-point solutions that aren't as agile. So with a typical data warehouse or enterprise data model or industry data models, those types of things, there's a struggle with having that data structured in a particular way. Every time you now want to add or change data, not only do those tables become larger, you have to consider all of the consumers of those systems and how they're going to use those data, so that if I change that, am I going to break things? And Data Vault has good solutions and patterns for all of those things. A lot of times, most people don't need the full set of capabilities of Data Vault, but it's nice if you're building in those patterns initially, that then you can iterate and incorporate more of the more complex features, and you don't have to, when you start bringing in more complex data sources, re-architect your enterprise data layer. It also helps with that efficiency, but then you also will generally build on, in Data Vault, they're called like information marts or data marts, where you build those curated data sets, and that's kind of, when you're talking, data products are a common pattern now. And Data Vault lends itself really well to that, because now you're building those unique models for a given value to the business based on the data that's coming out of and modeled in Data Vault. And you have very pointed use cases as opposed to very large tables that are trying to appease everyone and ultimately become a maintenance headache.
Thanks for sharing, Brian. My name is Ben. I'm a new assistant professor at the University of Akron. There was a paper published from Harvard a couple of days ago, shows that a lot of new entry-level jobs are gone right now. So from an employer perspective, do you have any suggestions to the new graduates?
Yes.
Or the intuition why that happens?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the bigger things, again, it's how do you provide value to an organization, and thinking about that, where the last 5-10 years, if you can code, you understand data, you understand analytics, we need people to do those sort of things. And so people would look the other way in terms of being less focused on the business. So for graduates, it's, I think, finding, interning, doing co-ops with organizations, figuring out industries and problems you actually like to solve that is more than just the technology itself, and then being able to now be a master in that technology, understand those core principles, bring that to an organization, especially organizations that haven't implemented those types of things yet, and have some business insight, becomes helpful, and you become immensely more valuable to any organization, rather than someone who doesn't care as much about the actual problem you're solving in the business. So I would say identify those types of industries or problems that you ultimately want to solve, and then look for organizations, understand the actual business aspects so that you can solve them easier without having to iterate as much internally with the organizations.
All right, we've got time for about one more question.
Hello, Brian. I'm Aishwarya. I'm also a master's student at the University of Akron. So you talked about a couple of problems which led to your dream of ScaleSense, right? How you started that particular solution. And you talked about scalability being one of the important factors which you were able to solve with this. So I was just curious, how well did the businesses or the organizations you interact with resonate with this new AI solution that you are proposing? Did you encounter somewhere okay, their current processes or current systems are not compatible with what you are proposing, or they being reluctant to adapt to what you are suggesting with your new AI agentic mechanism?
Yeah.
Just curious, how far were you able to solve those problems which you are curious about while starting ScaleSense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So particularly with this solution, or the question to whether to build internally or find something off the shelf, a lot of times you're trying to understand how much effort is this going to take and how custom is our situation to tools that exist. This is common with ERPs, where you would buy one and then customize it like crazy to actually make it match your business. In that sense, with Scaled Sense, we have a platform that's opinionated on the ways that infrastructure is deployed, things like branching strategies and the ways releases happen, and how things can promote, where you can basically add details around your compliance requirements and access layers. So when we talk to organizations, again, that tends to be probably the most jarring point, is like, you might have architects who already have a way of doing something, and now the challenge is like, we need to either adopt or change what we're doing to match this other solution. And so again, it's never going to be a fit for everyone, but the goal of our platform is to basically take what we've done with a team of consultants at organizations that might take 12 weeks, 14 weeks, and do it in a week, and have it work right away. And so that you can basically start to show that business value quicker. And so the argument is, what is more important, the potentially slight difference in opinions of how you might connect or architect something here versus 12 weeks of our time, or our organization not having that value. Again, and if you're building it internally, there's risk to that. With the example and the conversation that I talked about at the beginning, you have the two architect and engineer that left that company. They, again, built those custom solutions, and those things tend to not get as documented and, again, shared out, so that you lose all of that knowledge with those people that go. And so, again, the more you can use reusable patterns and well-documented frameworks, the better. So the same way that you don't want to be locked into a vendor if someone doesn't want to implement a feature, or they're, again, not going to support your solution anymore, you want to be able to utilize those common frameworks so that also anyone that comes new to your organization can look at all the documentation of whether it's Data Vault or Airflow or something along those lines, rather than custom building something in Python that is bespoke, and you have to basically create your own documentation, or oftentimes it just doesn't get created.
All right. Thank you, Brian. Another round of applause for Brian. Thank you. For you. Thank you very much.